It's been 10 years since the release of The Dark Knight, the seminal Christopher Nolan Batman classic that managed to redefine what audiences would expect from a superhero movie. Its success, along with Iron Man's, helped usher in a new golden era of superhero films that would completely redefine the landscape of pop culture. But unfortunately, its incredible success also spelled the beginning of the end of the DCEU before it could even get off the ground. Stick around, because on the eve of its anniversary, we're going to get into how the most successful Batman movie managed to kill everything else.
You got Lobster, you got it back, yeah. Lobster's a 10 out of 10, don't you grab it.
So everyone here knows about The Dark Knight. It was great. Best performance by Heath Ledger as the iconic Joker, Christopher Nolan firing on all cylinders, a movie that would redefine pop culture. But here's the thing. Christopher Nolan's success taught Warner Brothers all of the wrong lessons. Christopher Nolan's take on Batman was to remove all of the excess and try to create a plausible, gritty, realistic Batman that aesthetically stuck towards the rules of reality. Of course, the concept of Batman will never be realistic, as anyone who's ever seen footage of real-life superheroes knows that even if you walk around in the streets in a costume, the chances of running into a crime in progress are astronomically low. But the important thing that at least made Christopher Nolan's Batman feel realistic is that every piece of equipment in almost every aspect of the world was defined in some sort of real-world tech. Audiences used to the camp of the Joel Schumacher era of Batman loved the grounded, gritty, realistic take on the Caped Crusader. And after the success of Batman Begins, Christopher Nolan was given even more freedom to make the kind of movie that he wanted. Gotham City ceased to be a cartoonishly dark urban hellscape like it was in Batman Begins, but resembled more modern urban metropolises like New York or Chicago. The success of Batman Begins gave Nolan the clout to make a movie that actually interested him, and while Batman Begins feels like the film cowtailing to the needs of the studio, The Dark Knight is probably the Nolaniest out of all the Batman films, taking greater inspiration from gritty crime dramas like Michael Mann's Heat and Goodfellas than any traditional Batman story, despite taking very loose inspiration from The Killing Joke. The film, of course, was a tremendous success, leading to $1 billion in revenue and an Oscar for the deceased Heath Ledger. Nolan showed the world that superhero films could work as serious drama, despite the troubling fact that someone still had to make toys out of the thing.
The Joker's out to destroy Batman!
Me!
The Joker attacks and hits the Batmobile, but Batman fights back with battle-ready missiles.
Oh, shush.
The joke's on you, Joker! The Stealth Launch Batmobile. Stealth Launch Batmobile vehicle with Batpod. Figures each sold separately.
I'm a man of my word.
Play games at DCHeroZone.com. Ask your parents first.
This would serve as the beginning of the end. While the Nolan films managed to bring Batman into mainstream cultural relevance, it was a one-trick pony, something that would only really work for Batman and not necessarily the rest of the DC properties. But the same year, in 2008, Marvel would finally debut their first studio-funded and produced film, Iron Man. And this would soon come to serve as an even greater paradigm shift in the world of pop culture. One little end credit scene would usher in an entirely new universe filled with possibilities.
You think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you've become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet.
Who the hell are you?
Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D.
This put Warner Brothers and DC in a bind. Nolan demanded that his Batman universe be completely separate from any of the more fantastical settings of the extended DC universe, so at best they could only get one more film out of him. And with top-tier talent like Christopher Nolan, it's not uncommon to have a classic one for us, one for you mentality, where he'd make the film that the studio wanted, then he'd get to make the film he wanted. After he made Batman Begins, he was allowed to make The Prestige. After he made The Dark Knight, he was able to make Inception. But a funny thing happened with Inception. It was an incredible hit, one of the very few blockbusters of the modern era that wasn't based on a comic. It wasn't a sequel, reboot, or remake. It was an original film that stood on its own and was a tremendous success. And Christopher Nolan essentially earned the thing that all creatives aspire towards. He got the do whatever the fuck you want card. It's a rare thing granted to only the most commercially successful artists who can still maintain a great deal of critical praise. Once you've got it, it takes a lot of failure before you have to give it up. Hell, M. Night Shyamalan took nearly an entire decade to burn through his after the success of The Sixth Sense. This simply meant that Christopher Nolan would never have to make another superhero film ever again, which for him was great because after The Dark Knight Rises, it became abundantly clear that he did not give a shit about superheroes and wanted to go back to making real adult movies. But the success of his grim and gritty aesthetic stuck and would become a poison that would choke the entire thing to death. Because in 2011, Warner Brothers tried to launch a fun and funny superhero franchise, a little something called Green Lantern. But that film was an incredible colossal bomb so big that Ryan Reynolds would keep on using it as a punchline in both Deadpool movies. So the order of the day was to keep things grim and gritty, and that would be the edge that would help the DC superheroes compete against the MCU. But by 2012, it was already too late. The grand thesis of the MCU experiment was completed with the release of The Avengers, which had been finished in 5 years, where the Nolan Batman universe was coming to its close with The Dark Knight Rises, offering the final conclusion to both Nolan's Batman saga that served as a lukewarm end to the trilogy. Nolan would be given a superficial producer credit on a few of the films that would come after, but it was abundantly clear that he was done making superhero films and had been successful enough on his own projects that he'd never need to go back. So in 2013, Warner Brothers blundered forward with Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, serving as the anchor point for launching their cinematic universe. But by this time, starting something new was already too late, given the fact that Marvel was already knee-deep in Phase 2. What would follow from this would be an extended game of telephone, as each subsequent film would be made as a reaction towards the negative reception of the one preceding it. Christopher Nolan would serve as a supervising producer, but it would become quite evident that he just did not give a shit about any of this. So Zack Snyder became the unofficial architect of the DCEU. But the thing about Zack Snyder is, he's a great filmmaker in terms of technical prowess, but he's a miserable storyteller. In many respects, he's very similar to Michael Bay in that they're both filmmakers who cut their teeth directing in the commercial world before crossing over to film. The key difference, though, is that Michael Bay knows he's not a storyteller and doesn't ever try and elevate himself. Michael Bay knows what he likes making and is good at making it and feels next to no need to apologize for it. I have a pretty interesting secondhand anecdote about Michael Bay. In my time in working in media, I met someone who became part of Michael Bay's inner circle of friends. Now you see, Michael Bay doesn't like to hang out with other Hollywood folk. When Michael Bay wants to relax in his mansion, he's got a little circle of friends who are mostly blue-collar folks in higher-end positions. So he'll have a group of flight pilots and mechanics, and those people who he'll occasionally have come into his private theater in his mansion. So one time, this guy is over at Michael Bay's, and he's got his posse together in a screener copy of Hail Caesar. He puts in the movie for about 10 minutes, but then pops it out because it's boring. He then apologizes to all of his buddies for subjecting them to something in his household that's boring. That is how Michael Bay views the world of filmmaking. He's either presenting something that is fun, like an explosion or action sequence, or funny, like a racial stereotype or comic relief character yelling very loudly, or he is showing off something that is sexy. That is the entire range with which he has to communicate with, and he has little desire to work with anything outside of that. He is an artist fully in control. Unlike Michael Bay, who deliberately tries not to elevate himself, Zack Snyder thinks he is smarter than he is. I don't think anything better articulates why that's the case than the infamous Batman rape quote. Everyone says that about Batman Begins. Batman's dark. I'm like, okay, no, Batman's cool. He gets to go to a Tibetan monastery and be trained by ninjas. Okay, I want to do that. But he doesn't, get raped in prison. That could happen in my movie. If you want to talk about dark, that's how that would go. Yes, you don't get any more try-hard edgelordy than by proudly proclaiming that your material is mature than by boasting that in your universe, Batman can get raped in prison, because that'll help endear him in the hearts and minds of children and families who go to see these movies. There is no further proof of this than his original movie Sucker Punch. It was the first film he made that was not based on a previously existing property and was the ultimate proof that Zack Snyder should never have any creative control or free rein to determine an original story. So you have a talented filmmaker but terrible storyteller trying to imitate the dark grittiness of a genius like Christopher Nolan, but he doesn't quite have the skills to really replicate what made Nolan's take work. And you also have a cinematic universe you have to build at double speed. Basically now you have a runaway train barreling away from its station, and it wasn't so much a question of if it'll crash, but when. Man of Steel is not a terrible film, but it is one caught between playing things straight in terms of depicting how the world would realistically react to learning about the existence of Superman, and having Russell Crowe ride a space dragon during a spaceship battle. You can have one or the other, but you can't have both. Then of course came the Metropolis City destruction scene, which was incredibly divisive. On one hand, fans finally got an Unleashed Superman fight on the big screen, and a live-action version of a Dragon Ball Z fight. But they also got a Superman who didn't care about people, and for a long time fans that kinda hurt. And it was made all the more painful by the fact that Captain America is very similar in terms of his ethics and what he represents, and Marvel found a way to make him work for modern audiences. But the train needed to go forward. The MCU was already halfway deep into Phase 2, and the DCEU had barely even started. So things were moving forward in Batman vs. Superman. But you see, the big problem is that the powers that be didn't seem to understand that trying to imitate the perceived darkness and grittiness that had worked so well in the Nolan movies was a bad idea for the much broader and more colorful other parts of the DC universe. But in the press, they doubled down, claiming that DC films would be filmmaker-driven. Filmmaker-driven basically became code for dark and moody and doubling down on the perceived Christopher Nolan grit, but without the sophistication of Nolan storytelling, what you're left with is this. Batman vs. Superman is a film with all the light and color of a funeral dirge and the pomp and impotent transgressive rage of a teenager who thinks he's dark and edgy because he bought an Invader Zim shirt from Hot Topic to go along with his Funko Pop figurine. I'm not going to go into great detail because this horse has been beaten to death by many other people, but comparing Batman vs. Superman to The Dark Knight, it's painfully obvious to see which was the real movie and which one has just got a lip piercing at the mall to piss off mom and dad. It was a complete clusterfuck of a movie that doubles down on the divisive dark elements of Man of Steel and tries to sell them as part of a larger plan by having Batman get pissed off by Superman's careless attitude towards the wanton destruction in the end of Man of Steel. This was a bad idea. It continued a trend of constant course correction where each film was just an extended response towards the previous one. Oh, Man of Steel had too much destruction? Well, Batman vs. Superman will deal with it and totally go even darker while introducing the Justice League. Oh, people didn't like that? Well, Suicide Squad, which was,
So that's it, huh? We're the patsies. We're some kind of Suicide Squad.
well, now we're gonna have a trailer company re-edit the entire movie so it's more like this. You didn't like that either? Well, Wonder Woman, directed by a woman. Please like this. Oh, God. Please, Jesus Christ. Thank God you actually did like Wonder Woman. And Wonder Woman's coming back for Justice League. For the love of God, get Zack Snyder out of here. Just get him out of here right now. I don't care who you have to get. Josh Whedon, that guy who did the Avengers, he's free? Well, yeah. Let's see what he can do. Throw another $50 million in reshoots. Wait, what about Henry Cavill's mustache? Don't worry. We'll fix it in post. Just get it done. $300 million later, and you have a film that, despite the fact that it's the first time bringing together some of the most iconic characters ever to grace a comic cover, is a tremendous disappointment, especially given the fact that the third Thor movie managed to gross $200 million more than Justice League, which itself was made lighter in tone as a response to the criticisms of Batman vs. Superman, which itself was made in response to the criticisms of Man of Steel, which was an attempt to try and create a cinematic universe based on the grim and gritty success of the Chris Nolan Batman film. And so you get a decade-long game of telephone that has led to complete and utter failure and losing billions of dollars, all while the merry Marvel marching society continues to move forward, conquering all of pop culture. The sad thing is it doesn't need to be like this. There's a very easy way for Warner Brothers to win this race, and it means taking something else out of the Marvel playbook, something beyond just the superficial hook of a shared universe. The biggest problem is that they're trying to hang on to the idea that having a dark, edgy stories driven by name-brand filmmakers is the key to success, instead of going for lesser-known people who understand the material. People like Paul Dini, Bruce Timm, and Greg Berlanti, who already work in-house. Unfortunately, these people were all sequestered within their little animation and TV ghettos, kept away from handling these characters on a bigger scale. Perhaps the smartest thing Marvel did was in giving opportunities to off-kilter people who would not be given the chance otherwise. Josh Whedon would never have been given the chance to handle a $200 million tentpole. Marvel took a chance on him, given his long history in writing comics and superheroes. Same thing for the Russo brothers or James Gunn until they decided to fire him for 10-year-old tweets. All these guys don't have major film experience, but they either have an affinity for the material or comic experience / nerd cred that makes them a good fit, and there are dozens of people working in animation or TV who would probably do a much better job with these characters than someone like Zack Snyder or David Ayer. Imagine a Paul Dini Batman movie or Justice League headed up by Bruce Timm. While not perfect, super producer Greg Berlanti has managed to create a self-contained DC universe that is just as big and sprawling as the comics, all within the confines of Arrow, now creating a block of programming that consists of 5 separate but interconnected series. So if there's anyone who can handle the task of building something new from the ashes, I think that's as good of a bet as anything else. Now, for all you DC fans, don't think I'm hating on it just for the sake of hating. I'm just hating on the incompetent management that has the keys to the kingdom but has failed to capitalize on some of the most iconic and interesting characters ever created. To me, the Bruce Timm DC universe is the golden standard which all these movies should be striving for. It's the perfect mix of combining the epic scale and scope and emotionally mature storytelling that keeps people coming back with the fun and kooky weirdness that is inherent to the extended DC universe. It's not apologetic or afraid to be what it is, and because it's not trying to be edgy but instead timeless, it is why it is still appreciated to this very day. I hope they do eventually get their shit together because I'd like to be able to walk into a Superman or Batman movie feeling excited instead of getting ready to laugh at it. But whoever is over there that's in charge seems committed to be taking parody suggestions from the Teen Titans Go as actual creative development decisions. Just stop. I think we've gone beyond the point of parody when the Teen Titans Go episode, where they mock the self-righteous dark grittiness of the DC movies, now seems to be serving as an inspiration point for the live-action Titans series.
What are we looking at, Robin? It is very dark.
Of course it's dark. Nighttime is the most serious time to fight crime.
Where's Batman? Fuck Batman.
I've been so conflicted and unhappy all this time and never even knew it.
I get it, but you can control it.
And I can't smile anymore.
Tight! Whoa, you guys look serious.
I don't know what I've become.
My mom says there's no such thing as monsters.
I used to think that. I was wrong.
The monster in me is feeding on your anger. I don't know who I am anymore! Snap out of it! Madness, madness. What is happening to our team?
Then maybe it's time to rethink your priorities on how you're handling this material. So until DC can grow beyond the specter of Chris Nolan, then this shit is not going to get any better. But I hope it does. Someday, maybe after Marvel's done earning all the money in the world. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'm launching a new feature for the Lobster Magnet channel. I've opened up a Fiverr page where you can ask me a question to answer in my next video. So come on over and send me a Fiverr so that your question or silly thing can be featured in the next video I make. More details in the link below or on the side button of my YouTube page. Thanks for watching this video, and remember, lobsters and tennis, but don't you grab it.